Sahanavavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Mastuma Vidvishavai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. This is a teacher and student prayer. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us. May that one, may we work together with great vigor and energy. May we also have this vigor and energy in all endeavors. May we not cavil or unnecessarily fight with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. We have now come to a position in the study of Bhagavad Gita where we are at the 18th chapter. The 18th chapter is the last and final chapter in this wonderful long poem that we call Srimad Bhagavad Gita. There are some 78 stanzas in this last chapter. So it is a mammoth composition akin to the stirring music of a Beethoven. These stanzas are woven, and every note, if you will, if you compare it to music, every jot, every tittle, every syllable has profound meaning. The way we study these scriptures is to find the inner workings of the author. What was he thinking? What was the position and wiring that he had when he brought out this beautiful poem? And so this is not a book, just to remind you again, like a novel, you study it. Some people study it in a certain way, that is, to study the beginning of the teaching that is contained in the second chapter. Second chapter is structured in such a way, there's also a very long chapter, because it tells about the whole content up front. The last chapter summarizes the whole thing, so we can expect some repetitions. And repetition, of course, is the way in which we learn. The 18th chapter, why 18? Some people ask. What is the significance of 18? 18 is a multiple of 9. And as I mentioned probably before, 9 itself is an accumulation, a multiplication of 3. 3 times 3, 9. And in 9, we have the whole representation of existence. There are 3 creative aspects to the author of this universe. There's this creative faculty, this sustaining or preserving faculty or protecting faculty. And there is this dissolving faculty. Birth, life, and death is represented in it. These are 3 things. The Lord of the universe has these 3 qualities, so to speak, or attributes. This whole universe, and this is labored also in the 18th chapter, is a combination of 3 evolutionary forces that we call binding forces or gunas. And so this is Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, by now well known to us. It's not the end of it, because this 18th chapter elaborates on this. And the purpose of this evening is to give an introductory background to this important chapter, this 18th chapter, because as we said, the second chapter says, this is what we are going to say. This is the whole teaching. You won't understand it in one go. We can't allow you, or we can't expect you to swallow the whole thing in one go. So we're going to give it to you, but then we're going to break it down. And so it's broken down very comprehensively between chapters 3 and chapters 3 and chapters 17. But the 18th chapter now says, this is what we have told you. Anybody who knows anything about public speaking will know that this is a technique. Let me tell you what I'm going to say. Let me tell you what I'm saying. And then eventually, let me tell you what I have said. So there can be no mistake about the teaching. This is not a book that we just breeze through. This is a book that we study, appreciating the beauty of the poetry and the concepts that lie within. And this is Yoga Shastra. That is, this is the whole scripture on the subject of the implication of the Vedantic principles contained in the Upanishads. What should we do? What is the way in which we should conduct our life in a practical way? Very often, even people who study this Bhagavad Gita raise a question. Yes, but I want something practical. In which case they've missed this message of the Bhagavad Gita. What could be more practical than somebody in psychological distress and a rescuer coming that has more knowledge than anybody, some entity that comes especially to teach, some entity that is perfect and full and free already, that comes to our rescue willingly, lovingly, and takes us out of the darkness of depression and into the light of knowledge. So just to remind you where we have come from. We have come from despondency. Arjuna sits in a condition that most of us either have sat in or maybe are sitting in now, and takes this aspirant by the hand smilingly and takes us gently through the spiritual evolutionary process up until the 18th chapter. And there, all these things are reiterated, just in case you didn't understand or you got it wrong. Every chance to understand this beautiful bouquet of flowers presented, this essence of these Upanishads. Many people say, oh, Upanishads, I can't study, that's too abstract. All right, then the Bhagavad Gita is here. Vyasa has given us not only an arrangement for the Vedas, but also taken the very milk. See, in the Gita Dhyanam, we have that concept where Arjun is there, the drinker of the milk, representing all of us. We are drinking this nectar. And the Upanishads are the source of this milk that flows. And Krishna is the one that makes it flow to us. What a beautiful concept this is. So let us take an overview of this chapter, and next week we'll go into it in depth. We may cover a few preliminary stanzas of this mammoth chapter, 78th chapter. But let us try to understand the structure of it. There are 15 parts to it, and I think that's useful to know. It begins with a question that came up way back in the early parts of this Gita. Because in the early chapters, two words have come up, sannyasa and tyaga. Both seem to mean the same thing, but we know from very early on that there is a difference of stress. See, today we think in modern times that sannyasa means, and we have a picture of an ordained monk or nun. But that's not what Krishna means, and it's not what Arjuna understands. It's just a modern concept of it. We have to go back to the 5th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita to refresh our memory and discover what this sannyas means. So, if we go back to the 5th chapter, and he who neither, see, nyaya sa nitya samnyasinyo, he who neither likes nor dislikes should be considered as constantly practicing renunciation. You are a perpetual sannyasi if you are immune to any pairs of opposites, likes, dislikes, pain, pleasure, hot, cold, praise, blame. These are variously pairs of opposites. You have to be far above these pairs of opposites, immune to it. And if you understand this, and if you practice this, if you are the very embodiment of impartiality, then you are automatically free. These are the binding things which are keeping you from your freedom. Don't forget, the goal is freedom. And this last chapter, therefore, is called Moksha Sannyasa Yoga. That is freedom, liberation, through, if you will, sannyas. The whole title tells us how to get there and what is the purpose and goal of life. Goal of life, moksha, freedom. We don't experience freedom in normally speaking. Nobody has the freedom to just suddenly get up and fly. In history, we've no doubt tales, fantastic tales of the ancient Greeks or somebody attaching feathers to their arms, jumping off a building, and being a little sorry that they did it. Probably very, very sorry that they did it. So we are not built in this way. We are all built with some confines and conditions. But that's on the one side. On the other side, these confines and conditions are made for our freedom, for the pursuit of our freedom and the attainment of freedom. Let us take, for example, the fact that the spine in the human is of a different kind to every other animal. We are bipedal. This bipedalism allows us to explore things much more deeply, gives us a facility with the hands. And in the yogic idea, concepts, it gives us a neurological structure that loosens up the energy, internal energy, in the psychic energy necessary for our freedom. Let us take our capacity to think. There's no other creature that is there that has the capacity to analyze, that has the capacity to deeply understand, appreciate, and be moved by cultural things such as music, art. Art, music, and religion, these are the ways in which we will open up our freedom, using the capacity to imagine, using the capacity to create our own reality by creating an internal structure, a visualizing structure that manipulates the cosmic forces that we call tanmatras. It is only the human that has this capacity. The FOXP2 is a variation, a genetic mutation that allows for human speech. This is the biological explanation. Our explanation is that speech was given to us, as it were. We developed speech. Maybe we even urged it along. The capacity to know, the thirst to know, developing speech. And then the realization that this speech, this peculiar vibration through the voice box, coming out as formed words with accompanying pictures called concepts and feelings that accompany it, that guide everything along. Where does this come from? And we understand that there's an initial vibration, this pranava, this omkara, which is there, from which everything comes. So all of this, in some way or other, is discussed in this 18th chapter, particularly the structure of nature itself, repeated time and time again, a whole chapter dedicated to these evolutionary forces that we call gunas. So what does this sannyas mean? We've just described it. It does not mean taking vows of renunciation, living in convents, going off into caves. This is, after all, what Arjuna wanted to do. But this is a structure designed for us to get out of a psychological difficulty. It's a practical thing. Who does not have any kind of psychological difficulties? We have physical difficulties. Arjuna didn't have any physical difficulties. He was physically strong. He was a military man. But look at how his whole mind was shattered. And today, when I ask a question, who is the greatest psychologist in the world historically? People say Freud, as some people say Jung. And then other people, a little bit more maybe subtle, will say, oh, Buddha. I say, go back much further, some 5,000 years, Krishna is there. And here's a psychological condition. What does Krishna do? He doesn't drag the mind down. He doesn't say you're weak. He doesn't say you're a sinner. He doesn't say you're not worthy. He doesn't fill the mind with guilt. He fills the mind with hope and strength from the very start. Builds the mind up. And what is the basis of this? You are that single Atman. You are that single divinity, one with Brahman. Some people may say connected with Brahman. Some people may say related to Brahman. But all of these are just different positions. designed for us to step up from one level to another, until we finally realize a final conclusion. Some people, in studying this Vedanta and the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, seeing that the Bhagavad Gita is so practical, they may miss the point. They may say it's very, very complicated. The whole of this Vedanta philosophy seems extremely intellectual, abstract, and complicated. Despite the fact that Krishna has brought it down to very simple language, simple instructions. The difficulty is in changing our habit. The difficulty is in going against the grain, which will always cause friction within us. It's a very difficult thing to change a habit. But by progressive endeavor, by purity of intention, by, as Swami Vivekananda says, by purity, by patience, and by perseverance. We can add one more maybe to say, by being present here and now, being away from the anxiety of the future. Now, if action is done with a future in mind, namely results in mind, this is the very antithesis of what is called Tyaga. Tyaga means disowning, detaching from any results or any expectation of results. Sannyasa means I don't want any action. I dissociate from any action that has any desire within it or motive within it. I'm simply doing it with a sense of attunement to the overall supreme, what we might call a supreme self. It is a question of taking the ownership of it, or taking the actor of an action and replacing it reverentially with the Lord of the universe, and then seeing how that operates through every hand and every head and every eye, through all limbs, through the whole being, all multitude of beings, including this localized version that we formerly called myself, my body, my this, my that. Then a second way, of course, will be this karma yoga. So sannyas in this context refers to a technique in practice, which is equivalent to jnana yoga. What here in this Bhagavad Gita, the whole of the second chapter is dedicated to Sankhya Yoga. Sankhya Yoga is Vyasa's reconciliatory term, Krishna's reconciliatory term, seeing that there were philosophers that were dualists and they called themselves Sankhya. He wanted to reconcile different positions. No, you're not wrong. Every advance, every refinement throughout history in a spiritual teaching is just a reconciliation. It's not destroying the former idea. It's taking the former idea and incorporating it in a bigger, more expansive kind of way of thinking. For this reason, historically, there's a great difference between the pantheon, say, of the Western gods, such as we find in the Greek pantheon. These were deities who lived in a heaven, who basically didn't really rule. We can't say they were rulers, but certainly they created the humans, and the humans were considered to be very inferior, not very important. While the gods carried on their businesses and their affairs, the humans duplicated that. And there was not necessarily any moral leanings about it. It was all about power. It was all about what moved something, or who we have to propitiate in order to get a result. This whole result orientation is gone in this system. The system that we call sannyas and tyaga. So it's not that this is a new subject. We have to go way back. But don't forget, this is a revision. This is taking all these ideas and reminding us, here is a summary of the entire teaching. And some people, therefore, studying this Bhagavad Gita, may study first the second chapter as a technique, then go to the 18th chapter, and then in between, and see what are the refined details of it. It's one technique. It's not necessarily suitable for everybody, But some people study it like that. Get the overview, a helicopter view. If we want a helicopter view of this 18th chapter, we start off with this important subject. How do we make things practical? What is the sannyasa? It's referred to, but Arjuna still wants clarification, absolute clarification for sure. So please tell me, what is the sannyasa and what is tyaga? How are they different? And we can say one is jnana yoga and one is karma yoga. And then the second subject taken up will be, if we have this kind of renunciation to do with karma yoga, are there different types? Yes, because there's sattvika, rajasika, tamasika. Let's take tamasika, for example. This kind of renunciation. Very often you'll find people who are persuaded because of maybe their own nature. There is nothing to do. Therefore, I can relax. I can sleep all day. Well, this is a kind of renunciation, giving up any physical activity, possibly even any mental activity. But we can soon recognize the flaw in it. It is laziness. It is tamasika. We won't get any enlightenment in this way. Then there is rajasika kind of tyaga, that we can give up any action except that which benefits us, that still contains egoistic tendencies and therefore becomes painful. And both of these types are purposeless. Those people, coming back to one point I made, who may think this is all very complex and not very practical, forget the Vedanta in its highest conclusions has only 3 principles. You can't get simpler than 3. Well, you can. You can go to 1. What is this 1? Brahman alone exists. You can't get simpler than that. You can't get simpler than 1. Brahman alone exists. And the Atman, this self in you, is one with that Brahman. And what we call this nature and this world, this Prakriti, described variously, comprising gunas and so on and so forth. All of this is mithya. All of this is just an apparitional existence. Now you can condense these all into just one principle. Brahman alone exists, and all the others simply spring from it. So this is very simple. What's the difficulty? The difficulty is reconciling the gut with it. The gut doesn't want to accept it. In this very first stanza, and we'll come back to it in our expansion, we have to understand not one word is wasted. So Arjuna is describing Sri Krishna in 3 different ways. It's telling us that Mahabahu is a word being used. Mighty armed. It's telling us that Rishikesha, Lord of the senses. And it's telling us that is a slayer of Keshi. Keshina Sudana, slayer of Keshi. Of course, Keshi, we have to go back to a certain story, a certain mythology, if you will. But Keshi was an asura, a demon, assumed the form of a horse and encountered Sri Krishna. And the horse was intent on swallowing Krishna up. But of course, Krishna, as a kind of superhuman being, thrust his arm into the stomach of the demon. So I refer to this when I say our gut resists. The lowest form that we have in our spiritual evolution is that we stick to survival issues. Our difficulty is we are no different from any other creature. We are like a demon, having a demon nature, complete with self-interest. And our gut doesn't reconcile with any higher values. So we start off with this basic urge. And this gets destroyed at the gut, that is the survival area in us. And then further evolution goes, mighty armed, we require strength. We require physical strength. We require psychological strength, emotional strength. This was the primary message for Arjuna. I can rescue you from this depression, this lowest point in your mental aura, but you require strength. And when we have the strength, we have the capacity to change, to overcome the friction associated with change. And then we become Lord of all the senses. So this description of Krishna is really a description of our spiritual growth, our spiritual evolution. How clever this is. So in studying this, now that we're at the 18th chapter, and no doubt you'll have to read and reread and restudy this important text, this important book, and find that not one word, not one syllable is wasted. Just like, as I say, in constructing music, not one note is wasted. If you have a composer who recognized as a world genius, something like a Beethoven, this whole Beethoven's life, I've been studying now the last few days because Romain Rolland had mentioned how Swami Vivekananda's speeches and lectures and words were like the stirring rhythms, you see, the great music, great musical intricacies, and the great creative and powerful impact of a Beethoven. I'm paraphrasing and elaborating on what he was saying, but that's really the meaning of it. Such powerful phrases being used. And what is the resource of it? Strength, absolute strength. Manliness is Krishna's description. Where has this cowardice come from? Get this strength. So the very first attribute that we require is strength. And what mitigates against strength is many, many different excuses. Phrased maybe in two words, if and but, if only this and but that, various excuses we make. So we're all suffering from weakness. Weakness is the cause. And weakness and ignorance are on a par. So the antidote to weakness is strength. The antidote to ignorance is knowledge. And ignorance and strength, and ignorance and weakness, and strength and knowledge, these go together. So, from the very start in this 18th chapter, Krishna is addressed in these three ways. In recognition of this great, great spiritual giant that is Krishna, who represents all of our potentiality. So, sannyas, tyaga, disgust, and then is it rajasic, is it tamasic, and the best naturally will be sattvic. Sattvic tyaga. That is a kind of karma yoga, which is purely of the sattvic type. That makes it the yoga. And then a wonderful analysis is made. What is action? What are the components? Why do we act? What is the structure of it? And so the component parts are analyzed. That would be the fourth section of this Srimad Bhagavad Gita, the components of karma or action. And then, if that is so, we normally think that we act. One of the difficulties we have and obstacles is we cling on to a prophet-actor complex. The actor complex is mitigated against or neutralized by sannyasa. The prophet is neutralized by tyaga, renunciation of the fruits, renunciation of the misunderstanding that we ourselves are acting. But this self that we call Atman does not act. So the fifth section will be highlighting that Atman is in action, no action whatsoever. It remains there. In the 9th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, it is highlighted, how this is a a city with an indweller. And then, sixth section, we have to understand once more, over and over again, the nature of this interaction of these three gunas, that without them, there's no action. These are the things which are moving, mobilizing, combining, recombining, and producing action. This is the impetus behind action. And then let us be practical. Is there a social context for our spiritual endeavor? What is the background to our action? The social background to our action is a caste system, so relevant today. You know, many places I go to, talking, say, about Hinduism, and non-Hindus bring up this one thing, and they say, all very well, wonderful religion, you have the Vedas, you have this concept of oneness, you have this great, these great techniques of yogas, you've explained all this to us, you have this inherent harmony of religions, all very good. This non-violence is there, all very nice. But what about this horrendous caste system? Thinking that this is an integral part of the Vedanta or the philosophy of Hinduism. But you see, if you want to understand this caste system, it's there in this 18th chapter. In this 18th chapter, 4 things are necessary, and they are of divine origin. Can't get away from it. What does society need to do to thrive? Now, this, of course, is mentioned previously, by the way. It's simply revising it. For society to be successful, we need dedicated people. Dedicated people who are dedicated also to the principle of nonviolence. They are prepared to uplift the whole of humanity and serve the whole of society with an interest for the welfare of all beings. How to protect them? We have to have the military people, the administration, civil service, if you will, those who protect and defend. And then the vast majority of society will be involved in wealth creation. They will need to be involved in industry and commerce, agriculture and so on, bringing in the wealth. And you have to make a provision for unskilled labor. These are the 4 fundamental castes. All the other variations, of course, have come historically. And naturally, we have many difficult areas within this. But you see, if you go back to the original structure, how perfectly and divinely it is structured. There's a better understanding of this. So my answer to those critics is, caste system is a wonderful thing. And then I pause, just out of fun normally, to see what the reaction is. And then I continue and explain that these varnas are necessary for the whole of society, regardless whether you're east, west, north, or south. Whether you are living 20 years ago, 200 years ago, or in the future, 200 years hence. These 3 things are necessary. These 4 aspects are necessary. And then the 8th section we could probably call as an endorsement. Exactly what is this karma yoga? And again, it's just a revision. Karma yoga is karma sannyasa. Karma yoga, it seems contradictory. Karma yoga is the renunciation of action. I am transcending the prophet-actor complex. This needs to be understood. And so what's in the way? Egoism. Egoism is harmful. Not ego, egoism. That is this prophet-actor complex. It's an interesting phrase I'm using. Prophet-actor complex. There's a woven complexity that inherently makes us feel it is our individual effort and we are entitled to the rewards of our actions. But this is our biggest stumbling block. This is our ego. And we have a whole course on this. This is why, coming up in a few weeks' time, we have this wonderful course, this Enneagram and Essence of Truth. it allows you to understand your particular variety of this obstacle, which we call aham, I. And then how to make it useful, how to make it an open channel for divine grace to flow for the welfare of everybody. Not to use it as an obstacle, or not to make it or feel that it's an inhibiting aspect or entity. And then the next section of these 15 sections will be that all actions belong to Ishvara, the Lord of the universe. The Lord is the creative aspect, the protecting aspect. I began by telling you how 9 was constructed, and 3 aspects of this 9 are this creation, this protection or preservation, and this dissolution. I didn't mention the others. I can go on to mention them now. The other 3 aspects of this will be these 3 gunas. I mentioned that. The other aspect will be our entire range of consciousness, what we call a waking state, where we are doing our battle, a dream and a dreamless sleep. This threefold categorization of 3 gives us the entire spectrum of the sum totality of our experience, what we call life. And so therefore, 18 chapters are here. 18, a multiple of 9, 8 plus 1, 9. And we know that any multiple of 9 with its digits added up, it comes to 9. And therefore it's seen to have some kind of rhythm, some kind of natural pattern within it. Another natural pattern will be the number 7, but we can deal with that in a separate talk if you like. But 9 is there. The reason why we repeat a mantra in our japa 108 times is we have to do it a lot, maybe let's say 100, but 108 is a multiple of 9. And every time we understand that, we can see and reflect on, oh, this represents the sum totality of the whole of existence. So all actions belong to God, that is Ishvara, with these 3 wonderful capacities of omniscience, omnipresence, omnipotence. Otherwise, creation really is a reflection of the substratum of existence, sub-existence. Existence we want there to remain, and when it's manifested, we call this creation. And then the other aspect would be consciousness, chit. When space and time is added, this is then creation. This is creation in terms of sustaining it, procreation, if you will, keeping things going by intelligence, light, creating rhythm, creating order, creating a system where nothing collides, creating a purposeful evolution, a progression toward a point, heightened point, investing ongoing life, making things sustained, making gravity pull things in, making electrical energy swing things out, creating a balance to keep the game going. And then ultimately, this dissolution of our own ignorance is there. The female aspect of it, feminine aspect of it, we call nature or Shakti. Now here you also have a Christian Trinity. God the Father as a creator, God the Son as the Logos, the light that sustains. And you have this Spirit, Holy Spirit. Yesterday we were studying and elucidating on the life of Swami Niranjananda. And he began his teenage years, if you will. He got involved in spiritualism, dealing with ghosts and spirits. And it's reported that Ramakrishna said, "We'll forget all of that. I'll give you the Holy Spirit." So the Holy Spirit is there. And this equates to this. This gives us an opportunity to choose, using our capacity for free choice and free will. And then the category of self-surrender, that means We bring in devotees, people who are interested in bhakti. Even when you discuss karma yoga, or we can see the basis of seeing the self in all beings and all beings in the self. And we can add another dimension to that. We can add love of God. We can say seeing God. We can put it in a personalized way, seeing God in all beings and all beings in our particular chosen ideal of that supreme. Who is competent to study this Gita? You may be surprised when you study that section, and then finally culminating in the dawn of knowledge. What a wonderful crescendo to this Beethoven-like chapter. And then, of course, as we began, Sanjaya's conclusion to this. We can see these are these 15 sections. It's convenient to break these up because the first section really is to do with this question of renunciation. If you want to know what is the essence of the Gita, Sri Ramakrishna said, if you repeat Gita, 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 you get Tyagi, Tyagi, Tyagi. That is a way of saying renunciation. It's all about this renunciation. Every spiritual teaching, the practical application of it is in this one principle, renunciation. But we have to really understand this term. That's why a lot of time and many stanzas dedicated to this one subject. And then how to put this into action, how to understand what does it mean. All of this is contained in this wonderful, wonderful chapter, 18th chapter. So having begun with a small background about this, we can deal at least with the first stanza. It begins with a question. And as I mentioned before, sannyasa and tyaga gets explained from the first stanza to the sixth. Arjuna Uvacha. Arjuna is asking a question. Sannyasasya mahabahu tattvam ichami veditam. Jagasya cha hrishikesha prattak keshine shudana. Arjuna said, of renunciation, that is sannyasasya, mahabahu, almighty armed. Tattvam, the truth, I wish, ichami, I wish, veditam, to know. And tyagasya, of tyaga, I also need to know what this is. I desire to know severally, almighty armed, the truth of sannyasa. And these terms come out, significant terms, O Rishikesha, Lord of all the senses, as also of Tyaga, and then O Slayer of Keshi. And when we reverse these qualities, we'll see this is actually a portrayal of our own evolutionary progress in spiritual life, in human life. So it's not that these truths have not been explained previously. As I say, is a summary, a synopsis of the whole teaching. And the implication, of course, of Arjun's addresses we have covered. Now, of course, we mentioned that the subject was covered and that the subject was defined. But Blessed Lord replies in this way. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Kamyanam Karmanam Nyasam Samnyasam Kavaho Viduhu Sarva Karma Pada Tyagam Prahus Tyagam Vichaksana Shanaha. Blessed Lord said, renunciation of Kamya Karma, that is action with desires. Now these desires can be very subtle. They can be the inward desire for, say, recognition, love, and so on. But any desire is an assumption that there is a hollow area in me, some kind of unfulfilled area, some kind of gap, some hole in my life. And the only way I can think of filling it is to go to the outside. And from the outside, put something to the inside. And so this expresses itself in different ways. And this is a highly meditative passage, because it gives us a chance to reflect. What is that particular area in us where we have a desire, no matter how big or small? When we renounce that, when we dissociate with that, when we become desireless completely, then this is called sannyasa. The sages, those wise people, they understand this sannyasa. The wise declare the abandonment of the fruits of all works as tyaga. I do something with a motive, no matter how big or how small. So these things need a little clarification. We can hanker after things in the area of, say, health or wealth, long life, progeny, name, fame, status, title, social recognition. So all these come under this title of kamya karma. Under this category also comes the hope for a good afterlife. Many religions have this promise. We can't give you anything now, but let's promise you something in the afterlife. Can we see the afterlife? We want it now. No. You have to wait, lead a good life, and we'll give you a cash reward afterwards. So even renouncing that really is the sannyas, to renounce all these desires. This is the view of some sages. But there are others who claim that it is tyaga, that is to abandon the fruits or rewards or effects of all your actions, such as, nitya or obligatory ones. Of course, this is not true. And so the Lord would clarify, all of us have to do actions that we have to do. Whatever is on our plate, we have to address. We can't just ignore it. This leads us then to a definition that there is a kind of renunciation, an interpretation of that, which is actually tamasic. We don't do anything. So there are specific actions that we are required to do, but kamya karmas are those that create new bondages. It's not just that we are maintaining something, new bondages are there. They're prompted by those actions. The seeds, these are seeds, of course, for future transmigrations. That means we continue on a wheel, as it were, the wheel of samsara. We continue going around in a spirit of frustration. Sri Ramakrishna has this wonderful thing to say. The aspirants endowed with sattva guna, this pure egoless quality, need not do any karma or action. In fact, all activities drop off from them of their own accord. Any endeavor on their part to retain karma provides itself futile. The Lord himself releases them from all duties. This would be the exception. Are you and I near to that? Is a question we all have to ask. The domestic activities of a pregnant young woman are reduced as her pregnancy advances. He gives this example, that after delivery of a child, she has no work except looking after the babe. Such is the case with those imbued with sattva. Imbued means, let's look at it statistically, minimum 51% purity, 49% other things. But the others who are not sattvikas should necessarily engage themselves in their allotted duties. If you haven't got that overriding sattvic element in you, in the mind, then you have to address your duties. You can't ignore them. So as the servant of a rich man, says Sri Ramakrishna, does the work assigned to him, the devotees of the Lord should discharge their duties, holding them all as the Maker's mandate. The Lord, this is your work. The Lord's name ought to be repeated mentally while the activities are going on at the physical level. This is a wonderful practice. This is called japa, continuous japa, all the time. How often should you repeat your mantra? This was a question asked my own guru. He said 24 hours of the day. At the appointed times, there's meditation on the Lord. It may also be carried on, but this is the goal, or this is the gist, I should say, of karma yoga. That is that you do all actions either for the Lord or at least as a companion of the Lord, recognizing the Lord's activity, the Lord's energy flowing through you without any reward because they don't belong to you. But this has been discussed previously, and it's a wonderful thing that we re-energize our understanding with this 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. We'll do one more stanza. Tyajam doshavad ityeke karma prahu manishinaha yajna dana tapaha karma na tyajam iti chapare. Some sages, some wise people declare that all actions should be relinquished as evil, while others say that yajna, gift, and austerity should not be relinquished. This is a wonderful way of presenting this in a non-dogmatic way. Some people say this, some people say that. What do you say? What's the truth about it? See, cause and effect are contained in all actions. They're inherent in all karma, in all actions. The effect is inevitable when the cause is set into motion. Can't stop it. And so when it rains, for example, the farmer and a house under construction alike get wet. The effect is good to the former and bad to the latter. So cause here in the form of rain has both good and bad effects on two different things. It depends where the rain is falling, on whom it's falling. The burning of a lamp, which is the cause, produces a good effect for a reader of the Bhagavad Gita. The bad effect on the insects that fall in the flame and perish. So we can see this very easily. But you see, there's a fourth group of sages mentions is in favor of persisting in the performance of yajna, dana, and tapas. What does this mean? In its pristine form, in its sattvic form, what we mean by worship is an attitude of adoration and love. This is true worship. Now, of course, there's other forms of worship, which is just ritualistic worship. We do it because it is traditional. We do it because it is legalistically required. I mentioned on one occasion somewhere that when people do very, very elaborate ritualistic puja, a fun question to ask is, what does Krishna say? How elaborate does Krishna want his puja? And he says, actually, what is required is only a flower, a leaf, and water. That's all. Because it's intention behind it. What is the feeling of adoration and love that goes with it? That's the significant, important thing. And then, what is this charity? This charity is spontaneously reacting to the law of the universe in the other. That is the highest form of charity. And then, what is this tapasya? This tapasya is maintenance. It's there to sustain what you have. Coming back to a talk yesterday on the life of an apostle, great apostle of Sri Ramakrishna, he was still doing tapasya because he and others also, after Ramakrishna's passing, continued to do tapasya. And you would have thought, haven't you done enough? What more do you want to gain? No, having come under the spell, as it were, of a divine incarnation or a holy person or a prophet, say, or some spiritual mystic saint who can transform your life with a look or a touch. What's the need then to go and do extra tapasya? And yet hard tapasya austerity was undergone. It's because in order to maintain that, you need to strengthen the will. What is tapas? Tapas is strengthening the will. When you take minerals and smelt them using the appropriate fluxes, breaking them down with intense heat and pressure, forming something new, you're making it stronger than its initial constituents. This is called tapasya. So this is the sattvic type of tapasya. You can easily see, and it's previously been described, other forms which are rajasic and tamasic. And this is the subject that is being discussed. Very interesting subject. But I will go on to that and reiterate that last stanza for you. And then we can't leave without just a very brief overview of the final answer, otherwise we'll leave you in suspense. Learn from me the truth about this abandonment. Abandonment, truly, O best of men, has been declared to be of three kinds, and then he elucidates what these three kinds are. And acts of yajna, worship, gift, austerity, should not be given up, is the final conclusion, but should be performed. Yajna, or worship, gift and austerity, charity and tapasya, these are purifying to the wise. I'm going to elucidate this on this more next week, but the purport of what I'm saying is that all of these things, these obligatory actions, these essential actions, having raised the question, these actions should also go. We should renounce these actions. Sri Krishna very adamantly says these should not. Why? Because they are purifying. This is the molten fire that makes, with flux and so on, that makes from the mineral components something precious. These are purifying things. These three things are necessary. This was also discussed, of course, comprehensively in the 17th chapter, but this is a summary, wonderful summary. It is said that if you are to understand something, the human capacity to understand requires 6 repetitions, a minimum of 6 repetitions. I don't know where this statistic comes from, but that is what they say, whoever they are, 6 repetitions. So this was understood in the ancient days as well. It was understood by Sri Krishna in this composition of Vyasa, and we'll pick this up next week in this wonderful, wonderful concluding chapter, 18th chapter, Srimad Bhagavad Gita. Please subscribe to this channel if you're just tuned in, and please look at our appeal for funding, since we are building, or since we are reconstructing a hall necessary as a part of our expansion in the propagation of our Vedanta philosophy. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.